Australians are being lied to again and again and again. We keep being told by our policy makers that they're fighting to make housing more affordable, fighting to give Australians a shot at owning their own home. But here's the truth. They don't give a rat's patootie. They just want to keep propping up a broken and distorted housing market because guess what? Real change requires real effort. And if housing affordability was to really improve, it would mean that house prices would have to fall. And there's more chance of hell freezing over than any Australian politician wanting that. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. A big brown bear saunters into a bar and goes up to the barman and says, "Can I have a whiskey and Coke, please?" "Why the big pause?" says the bartender. The bear replies, "I don't know. I was just born with them." And you were born with amazing taste, which means you must absolutely like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll keep you up to date on the realities of the financial markets because this is the big stuff that affects your financial well-being. For today's video, I'm going to react to the recent Q&A housing special.
How do you stop a rampaging property market?
How about at least trying to stop it? Instead of pouring petrol onto a speculative housing market, making it even worse, how about use whatever levers are at your disposal to reduce demand for housing and thus improve housing affordability? And don't just say we have to build more houses. That's all we've been hearing, yet house prices are climbing to more insane levels every single day. If building more houses was a magic bullet, why haven't you done it? And why haven't we seen immediate improvement? Or is it just an easy statement to make that doesn't lock you into any real accountability, thus pushing the issue into that place called the future, which will just become a problem for someone else to deal with?
With the comments the other day by the Reserve Bank governor that people may have to sell their houses, and the previous governor suggesting that the solution to the housing crisis was for everyone to take in a lodger, do you think the Reserve Bank is out of touch with the community?
The RBA governor seems to be the only mature one in the room. It's not their job to help political parties. It's also not their job to please the population. They've only got one tool, which is interest rates, to try and reduce overall demand in the economy when required. Now, the trouble is in Australia, everyone is now obsessed with ultra low interest rates because after the GFC, rates trended down year after year after year. And they actually went so low, it just encouraged over leverage into property. Now, prior to that period, the cash rate in Australia averaged around 5%, and this helped to prevent people getting into too much debt because debt repayments were quite high. But when many Australians can't even survive unless the cash rate's put down ultra low, you know you've got a major problem and way too much debt into the housing market.
Well, I don't agree with those comments. I can be really clear about that. We have a very significant housing crisis in our country today that has been building really for more than 25 years.
Yes, it has been building for around 25 years, but guess what? It's gotten so much worse just over the last few years. Ever since the RBA dropped interest rates to almost zero and then forecast no interest rate rises till 2024, combined with insane out-of-control immigration, in some regions, house prices have actually doubled just in a few years, turning our housing market from expensive into utterly insane.
And the fundamental problem that we have is that we haven't been building enough homes throughout that entire period.
Is it? Because there's clear evidence that Australia builds some of the most homes per capita than any other country. And it's definitely not our huge birth rate because that's been declining for decades now. Because simple mathematics would tell me if you have more migration, you need more housing. But if you have lower levels of migration, you'd actually need less housing. And many would clap back and say, we absolutely need these higher levels of migration. But my question would be, why? Is it because we're obsessed with growing the economy at all costs? Is it to gather more taxes from wage earners to pay for the pension for all the boomers retiring? Maybe it is, but adding millions and millions more Australians over a short period of time, well, they're going to have to retire someday, and then you'll have an even bigger problem.
When you look at international statistics, Australia has less housing per person than most nations that we compare ourselves to.
Let's see what Matt Barry says about housing supply in Australia.
For supply, we build a ridiculous amount of homes. Australia has the second highest rate of home building from a major country in the developed world, but also in terms of per capita rates for the last decade. We have been going mental at building homes.
So Australia's building some of the most houses in the world. So could the issue be that they just can't keep up with the huge number of arrivals coming every year?
So our government's got a really deliberate approach here. Our plan is to build, build, build. We need to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years, because if we build more housing, we have more affordable housing for all Australians.
We've been building more housing, but it hasn't improved affordability.
We also recognise that there are really acute problems that are being felt right now. Renters in particular are doing it really tough, and that's why our government is assisting with increases to Commonwealth rent assistance.
Commonwealth rent assistance, a few bucks extra per fortnight when rents overall have skyrocketed. How on earth is that helping renters? Let's have a look at a few graphs which show why renters have been so screwed over. You can see here at the end of the graph how net migration levels went ballistic after the pandemic. Now look at this graph of house and unit rents from 2021, which perfectly aligns with the immigration floodgates being opened. And if that's not enough, check out the population growth in Australia's major cities and compare that with the rental growth. So the government's aware of the absolute disaster in this country for renters, but from all accounts, they've created this disaster.
But one of the really important things, that's an article of faith for me personally and for my party, is that we want more Australians to be able to own their own homes. So we have a suite of policies which is assisting us to do that too.
Own their own homes? Australian house prices have now hit a median of $1.1 million. For the average wage earner to save a deposit will now take up till the day that they die.
It is a big agenda, a really big and rich agenda, and it's no surprise when you consider that we're a country today led by a Prime Minister whose entire life trajectory was transformed by his capacity to get secure housing in his childhood.
Okay.
Wouldn't that mean you'd be doing more to tackle this current housing dilemma? To make sure that current Australians have the same opportunities that previous Australians had? Check out this clip of the current Australian Prime Minister talking about the Australian housing market in 2016.
We're in danger of developing a society whereby some people are able to buy their 6th, 7th, 8th home, but people trying to get into the housing market simply aren't able to.
How things have changed.
How have I created a housing crisis in Australia?
So first things first, the bigger driver of our shortage of housing on the demand side is Australians' demand for space has increased. Our household sizes are getting smaller. That is a bigger impact than the impact of migration. So I think it's really important to lay the facts out here.
Matt Barry already preempted this kind of gaslighting.
They'll try and gaslight you about changing household size, but the average number of people per household hasn't budged in 25 years prior to COVID.
So yes, we did see an initial dip in the average household size after the pandemic, but when you look at the census of the average household size, you can see from the 2000s, it's remained between 2.5 and 2.6. And recent data is showing that the average size is increasing again after the initial pandemic dip. And that's obviously because more people require shared accommodation to be able to afford their rents.
Are the immigration numbers part of the housing crisis?
Well, between 2005 2008, net overseas migration into Australia tripled, and there was after that a long period, 8 to 10 years of housing shortage.
So from around the 1950s to the 2000s, net overseas migration held around 80,000 per year. And during that period, house prices rose modestly and were more in line with wage growth and inflation growth. But here we have that first spike in the 2000s where levels remained higher. And we all know about the recent spike and the impact it's had.
And there's another housing shortage now because there's been a big increase in immigration. It's clearly an issue. We need to think about it.
We don't need to think about it. We need to do something about it.
Alan, you've written that negative gearing and the capital gains discount have large effects on housing affordability.
My oath they do, but I'll let Alan respond.
It's quite clear that the house prices started shooting up in the year 2000. So I've kind of wanted to know what happened in the year 2000. And the answer was in September 1999, capital gains tax was halved.
This is dead right. Multiple charts show the Australian housing bubble commencing around 2000, because after that, house prices grew way faster than wages grew, and each year that happens, houses become less affordable, which means every year it becomes harder for someone to buy their own home.
What it seemed to me had occurred then was that it flipped the way people thought about housing. Housing went from being a human need, an essential kind of product or service, to being an investment market.
Spot on, Alan. That's when all this speculative madness started, because Australians are a smart bunch, and when they realised they could get huge tax concessions by investing in property, it wasn't long before that became our national obsession.
And the whole problem we've got now, the whole reason we have a crisis is because for 25 years, house prices have been rising on average at 6% per annum, which is double the rate of income. So the house price to income ratio has gone from 3 to 4% to 7 or 8%.
So for housing affordability to improve, house prices have to grow less than wages. And the quickest way for this to occur would be for house prices to fall. But does anyone in Australia actually have the balls to want this sort of housing affordability improvement? I'd bloody love to see it. More Australians being able to own their own home would be bloody awesome.
I don't know. I mean, it just seemed to me that changed the way everyone thinks about housing.
Do you think it has, Claire O'Neill?
Well, I think the fundamental problem that we have in the housing market is that we don't have enough housing in our country.
Come on, Claire. This response is now sounding like a bit of a joke, and it sounds so similar to what's being said in Canada, who also went hell for leather on immigration, that I feel like you've been sharing the same speaking points.
If we want to make homes more affordable, we need to build more of them.
On the question of negative gearing, because I'm going to take you back to it.
Yeah.
Is it having an impact?
At the end of the day, what I know is that we don't have enough housing.
If you want less of something, you tax it more. You want people to smoke less, you increase the excise on cigarettes. You want people to invest less into housing and build fewer homes, you tax it more.
This makes no sense to me. When it comes to housing, we actually do want less speculation from investors. The vast majority of property investors in Australia buy already established homes, which doesn't increase the supply at all. So reducing the incentive to speculate on property is good in my opinion. And if you're worried about supply, only provide incentives for new supply of housing.
You're going to have to build more houses. And so that you come back to the idea that there's nothing that is going to solve this problem that is not building more houses.
How about reducing immigration levels so we don't need as much housing? How about banning foreign ownership so we don't allow wealthy foreigners to park their money in Australia, making it much harder for citizens to own their own home? How about don't gaslight the Australian people?
With the urgent need to build hundreds of thousands of new homes in our major cities, is the Australian dream of owning a house with a backyard in a city over for all of my generation?
It seems like Australians have been fed this lie that we need to build so many more houses because we absolutely have to have this level of immigration. And because of this, you no longer can expect a high quality living standard that previous generations of Australians enjoyed. Scott Phillips from Motley Fool says it this way: why should Australians accept a lower standard of living so that governments can accept more immigration? Bloody madness. But let's see what the panel has to say.
Yeah, it might be, yeah. If you want a backyard, you're going to have to move a fair way away from the city.
Maybe if you want more space, you're going to have to move further away from the city.
If you are going to be aspiring to that traditional 800 square metre block, it's probably going to be further out than our capital cities.
My housing dream is a great inner city place with a fantastic park where my kid can play.
Bloody madness. I'm Biko Konstantinos.